kick off and maybe start with your story, your career as head of brand and communications at PensionBee.
Yes, so I'm Brooke, and I've been at PensionBee now for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I worked for another SME lending fintech. But before that, my whole career has been in e-commerce, retail, working agency side. And I think it's quite funny because in previous roles, we'd had other traditional banks as some of our clients. And I was often told, like, oh, or asked, do you want to work on this? And I was like, absolutely not. Can't think of anything worse than working in financial services. And then here I am a few years down the road, being reminded of that, but also actually really enjoying being a part of the fintech space. So yeah, it's kind of me to date.
Nice. And so that transition into financial services, I know you mentioned that, I didn't imagine working in that sector. How have you found that transition in specifically in a marketing role?
Yeah, so I joined, as I said, I worked for a previous fintech before, so I've been in this space now for about 5 years. Sort of pushed into it from COVID. I was made redundant, and I just was like, well, retail and e-com, there's not as much security. Let's find something else. And then I just stumbled across and into PensionBee.
Hmm.
And I think it was the combination of I really love the values that the business lead by and what they're trying to achieve with their mission. And then I think having a female CEO in Romy, that was something I found really appealing. So for me, it's like a combination of different values that align to my own, and then seeing people at the top that look like me and having the chance to make a difference with my skill set. So yeah, it seemed like a good challenge.
I mean, that kind of, I get the feeling, sort of motivates you in terms of what gets you up in the morning, sort of helping to bridge gaps in different people's careers and really fighting for what kind of you believe in.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, being able to do my part in educating and raising awareness on the gender pension gap is definitely one big driver of waking up in the morning. But I think under that, it's more broadly driving financial education in the UK and having a part to play in helping people understand their pensions and retirement planning. And yeah, it is really cool that I can marry my own interests and as a woman educate other women on potential gaps that they may come across in their careers or lifetime and how they can do something about it before it's too late.
I definitely think that's one of the benefits of working at consumer finance companies is, you can have a massive impact on all of your users, and everyone, or most people, are interested in pensions, but just probably don't know enough about it. So that's probably where, your SEO and content marketing and all the brand stuff that you do comes into play.
Yeah, and you're right. I think most people should be auto enrolled into a workplace pension. They may not understand it's an investment necessarily, and I think it's a unique challenge working for a pensions brand because it's a lifelong product. People will start working at 18 or so. They get auto enrolled from 22 unless they ask to be opted in, and then it carries on all the way to the point where they can draw down from their pension and then managing that until the point they die and then even handing that over as inheritance to beneficiaries. And yeah, there's very few products I think where you work with consumers on their across their whole life and being with them at different moments that may impact their financial planning. And yeah, it's quite a unique situation, I think.
And how does that at pension for you sort of, I suppose, tie to the bigger mission? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Obviously, in your role at PensionBee, but then as the company, where do you want to sort of go?
Yeah, so as a business, it's about building pension confidence so that everyone can enjoy a happy retirement. And then I think secondary to that, as a marketing function, it's about becoming the main pension provider of choice. So we've been around for 10 years now. Lots of people have consolidated their pots with us, but we want to make sure that we're a household name and people are putting all of their pension savings with us. And then from my side, as the head of brand and comms, it's about making sure we're known as a brand. So building brand awareness, helping work out what channels we should be on and how best to do that.
And how it's an interesting point. Like, obviously, there's the brand differentiation, but ultimately, and you've got products in terms of how easy it is to access your pension pots and all these things. But how do you view differentiation in what should be a kind of globally accessed product in terms of pensions themselves? Like, how does PensionBee differentiate, and how do you, within marketing, try and kind of emphasize that differentiation?
Yeah, I think number one, it's about our values and making sure that's lived and breathed as an organization through everything. So, one of the main ones is love, and that's showing love to our customers, showing love to each other, the way we approach our work, the way we approach our products. So, when we're creating all of the different elements of PensionBee, that's one of the driving values. But then I think when it comes to marketing it, we don't just talk about what the product is, we talk about how it makes you feel and what use it actually has to your life. So it's about making it easier, making it simpler, and actually from becoming a PensionBee customer and using, whether it's to consolidate, to contribute, to withdraw, your life is better and simpler as a result of using us for financial planning for your future. And I think often lots of brands miss that point. They talk a lot about the product and the features, but not really how it serves customers and
Mm.
what it actually means for them to have access to it.
It sounds like, and I think I can see it in your marketing, that it's just that customer care and education. And obviously, you have PensionBee has their own sort of podcast talking about pensions and stuff like this. So I think that kind of comes through in the
Yeah,
market.
and I think as well, to that point around customer care, we feature our customers in our ads, and I think that's quite a big point of differentiation that, in our latest campaign, which is when your pension's in a good place, you're in a good place, we've got four of our customers in the daytime TV spot. So they're talking about their real life experiences of being a customer of ours from all different points of entry. So whether they joined us to contribute, joined us to combined or withdrawing. And I think for customers, especially in the financial services world, to see people that look like them with the same needs as them using the product for their own lives, I think that's quite different to what's been done before.
And you mentioned, it's a good segue into the next section. You mentioned sort of that piece of content, featuring your customers. How, in your role, involved are you in the creation and sort of concepting of that creative, or is it more the metrics and the impact of that, or both? How do you?
Yeah, both. So from inception, we'll kind of decide internally what is the challenge. So for that one, it was about positioning ourselves as the main provider of choice. Pension consolidation when we started 10 years ago was quite new, it was inaccessible, but through PensionBee, we've helped to democratize finance and pensions. But now we've got lots of customers, they're bringing their pensions to us, but how do we make sure they've got all of their pensions with us? So we've got an agency partner that we've worked with from the very beginning, the creative agency, the Builder's Arms. So I think that's an important element of having an agency that you can trust, who understand the business, who understand what we're trying to achieve. And then it's a partnership from there on in. They'll take away what USPs we want to push, come back with ideas, we'll critique the idea, and it's an ongoing process until we land on something that we're like, oh yeah, this feels PensionBee, and we can see how this could work on every channel, and then we pitch that to Romy, our CEO, for sign off, and then she goes on from there. But yeah, I'm there through every step, whether it's like casting of actors. So in some of the spots, we've got actors through everything to wardrobe, to looking through the transcripts after, and then all of the rigorous watching to check that we're not saying anything we shouldn't be saying from a compliance point of view.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely get into that, but I don't want the bulk of this to be that specifically, but we can get into that. Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Before we do the metrics, then what do you sort of when you're I suppose pitching internally? What are the key metrics that you're trying to kind of hit? I know you mentioned brand awareness, but from a non-marketing perspective, it's hard sometimes looking into that. I don't actually know what that means. How do we measure that? So I'd be
Yes.
curious.
So we measure brand awareness quarterly and we look at prompted brand awareness. So when we ask people if they've heard of PensionBee, do they know who we are? I think in the last quarter we were at 56%, which is great. And then we also look at unprompted brand awareness. So without mentioning us, do they know who we are? And they're two metrics that for us we track each quarter looking at brand awareness. But beyond that, some of the other metrics we look at as a business are cost per invested customer. So how much does it cost to actually acquire our customers? And obviously that's where everything when we're looking at channels and optimization, are we spending money in the right places to get customers in the most efficient way? And then AUA, so that's assets under administration, and that's one of the other big metrics we're looking at PensionBee of how much have we got as a business under administration. And then we've got customer retention rates. So that's been relatively high and stable the whole time at 95%, which is pretty strong. Once people join us, they don't leave. And then customer satisfaction scores. So we've got Trustpilot that we track and then NPS scores as well. So a whole variety of different metrics to try and understand how people
Okay.
feel once they become customers
So
as
you've
well.
got sort of brand awareness, customer retention, and a few others. I
Yes.
think you also mentioned cost per invested customer and cost per converted lead. That seems very sort of marketing focused and ROI focused.
Yes, and that's more, I guess, of the acquisition team. So deciding what channels we're going to spend money on, how much we're going to spend on each channel to see which will have the biggest return on investment for us.
And with these metrics and general campaigns, I guess, and success of the marketing you're doing at PensionBee, what's worked, what hasn't, any key learnings?
Yeah, so I think radio and TV, they've been big trusted channels for us. And I think in part because consumers trust them, they know that to get anything on TV or on radio, they go through rigorous, analysis. There's checking what we're saying is fact checked. And I think, you know, there's something to be said for that, that whatever industry you're in, they know that a lot goes in and a lot of money to get through those phases. We've had an ongoing sponsorship with Brentford FC. That's helped drive brand value and awareness for us as well. And then National Geographic. So we've got a year-long sponsorship with them and National Geographic World, where we've got versions of our other linear TV ads running. Yeah, they've all worked really well for us as like big brand pieces to help consumers understand our proposition. And then I was thinking actually about what hasn't worked so well, and I think a couple of things, much more lower funnel, I'd say. So we did a podcast live event. Our podcast is super successful, the Pension Confident podcast, but there was something about the live format that maybe didn't work as well. It actually did really, really well when we put it out as audio, but in terms of getting people to attend the event, that was a struggle, and I guess I don't know what the disconnect there is, but maybe it's because realistically, he wants to spend their evening going to listen to podcast chat live. You might want to listen to it in your spare time or on the commute, but maybe not live. And then I can think of another influencer series we did, which was a video series on like what is a pension, like the basic evergreen stuff. And yeah, the content's really great. The production value is really high, but I don't know if there was like a misalignment on the distribution strategy or the influencer that we use, but didn't quite land in the way that we did. I think we've like driven a lot of value out of it since, but I think in terms of like from inception, what we thought might do really well by using an influencer not in the financial services
Mm.
space, probably before the rise of influencers as they are now. So yeah, it's kind of things I can think of that have gone really
Mm.
well for us, and then those that haven't.
It's interesting you mentioned there's a couple of things from that section. So obviously, working with radio and TV and adhering to BCAP and CAP guidelines, whatever industry you're in, and then looking at finfluencers, so marketing with influencers in a highly regulated sector, that brings even more scrutiny from both the ASA and the FCA. What's it like? You've worked in both non-regulated and regulated spaces, but what's it like working in marketing in a regulated space like financial services?
I actually think there's value in having those guidelines in place because ultimately they're there to protect consumers so that people aren't going around making rogue suggestions without being able to substantiate what they're saying. So I think anything that helps protect consumers, especially with their money, is a good thing in my opinion. I think it means that you have to be more creative with how you approach things, but I think ultimately what they're asking you not to do is don't give financial advice. Make sure that risk is put out there so people understand that this is an investment, the value of their money can go up and down, and that their capital is at risk, and that any capital gains aren't guaranteed. And I think those are key messages that we should be putting out there anyway. And I think in some of the other industries it'd probably be beneficial to have things out there around guarantees. But yeah, when it's often someone's second or first biggest financial asset they'll have, I think there needs to be regulation around it, which protects us as a brand and ultimately consumers.
And how do you stay creative with these guidelines in place? They sound sort of helpful to put the guardrails in, but yeah, how do you sort of push the boundaries whilst remaining compliant?
Yeah, well, I think that comes from having good agency partners who not only understand our business, but also, like I said, the different regulations, whether it's the FCA or Advertising Standards Authority. And I think that combination of their understanding of creativity and pushing the boundaries with us knowing the brand really well is kind of where the synergy comes into it. And yeah, I think it does allow you to be creative because we've had bold partnerships before, like I mentioned, Brentford, or
Mm.
the way we've pushed boundaries with some of our above the line activity. So I think it's possible to do it. And I also think naturally from being a challenger brand, you kind of have that energy anyway, that you're used to wanting to challenge things to be done differently and find a different innovative way of doing things. So I think maybe that's just part of the brand DNA anyway, that it's kind of lucky to be a part of,
Hmm.
as opposed to some of the other financial services companies out there.
And in terms of influencers, maybe pushing the boundaries with them, obviously they've been quite a big topic recently. There was a parliament debate about them, and they've been in the news recently. So, what's your approach with influencers, and how have you found working with them?
Yeah, so it's twofold actually. We've got an influencer agency that we work with for the majority of our influence work. So they, obviously have to understand all the guidelines, they do lots of the vetting. That simplifies the process for us in one regard. But then there's a subsection of influencers that we work with on a more ongoing basis. And I think building those relationships and trust help with those, because obviously ultimately these individuals also want to be looking after their brand too. But I think that comes from value alignment. So there are lots and lots of great influencers in this space who have backgrounds in financial services and who are doing great things. But I think it requires brands to really do their own due diligence of the kind of messaging they're putting out there, who else they're working with, just because obviously they can say anything and they can give advice in ways that we can't as a brand. There's value, I guess, in that they're able to say things that we may not be able to say, but then there's risk from that too. It's ensuring that they're not saying anything we also wouldn't want to be associated with. And I think that's where it comes down to like careful selection and working with people on an ongoing basis and ensuring that value alignment.
Definitely, I think there's naturally a bit of a grey area there between what the brand can say and what the influencer can say, but obviously the influencer is a representative of the brand, sort of towing the line in that sense. And that's why, transparently, why one of the reasons we exist is to try and help toe that line in an efficient way. And we see it across the industry trying to find the best way to work with these agency partners, with these influencers to get to the best outcome.
Yeah, and it's hard because as a brand, you want to ensure your tone of voice is represented and your brand proposition, but they also have their own agenda. They've got their own brand and proposition. So yeah, I think that's where that careful selection process and safeguarding the brand DNA and identity really comes into play.
And the current sort of review process, whether that be, it's a FinProm or a Finfluencer, any sort of marketing asset that leaves PensionBee, what are the different things you look for or are checking? What are the different stages, and what does that process look like?
Yes, so we manage everything through Asana, and then we've also got Google Doc where all of the documents live. So if someone's about to submit anything for review, there's a few different reviews they could have. There's the financial promotions review, tone of voice review, pensions review, compliance and legal, and then sometimes ESG as well. So depending on what kind of things are mentioned, you'll need to tag whoever is relevant that looks after that. They'll look at the promotion, they'll review it for their element, approve it, or provide feedback if it needs to be changed to comply with whichever rule they're looking at. So yeah, it's quite a manual process at the moment, but I'd say relatively streamlined compared to other financial services brands where I know it can often take weeks or months to get through different processes, but there's definitely things we could be doing to streamline that further or automate it a bit more.
And that time consuming element, what's the most time consuming part?
I think for me, so because I look at tone of voice, that can often be subjective as to if something is or isn't. And the volume of things that come through, we're 200 plus people at PensionBee. We put out a lot of comms every single week. So I think that element of rigorously reviewing something compared to our guidelines, but also then taking on board the feedback back from the other reviewers based on the different elements that they're reviewing. So yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge for me.
No, it's super interesting, and I think obviously you've got the review process, checking for tone of voice stuff, but also as you then publish this content and things might change, regulations, or the stock market takes a massive dip. Can we say what we said a year ago before Trump came to the office? These sorts of things. So how do you manage the life cycle of the content and creative you're putting out?
Yeah, that's a really good point because if I'd say one thing about working in fintech is like needing to work at speed and also in a resilient way because things change all of the time. So as a brand and comms team, we have a monthly report meeting where we'll look at everything that we've put out in that month, which gives us an opportunity to not only look at performance, but yeah, just how that's done, but also compared to the previous year, so other content put out in that period. As a business, we have an annual review cycle. So we'll look at every piece of content or anything sat on the marketing website or the app once a year to ensure it still complies. So that's a really, really long process that involves multiple people across the business. And yeah, some of the ways we try to improve that process is putting in automation around ways of identifying things that change regularly. So the state pension amount changes each year. That's something that we have to update. What else could change? The tax year changes every year. So there are small things that sit in various places that could be easy to overlook, but are really important for people to understand to manage their finances. So yeah, there's some of the simple things that we need to automate better to free up the time to look at the bigger pieces. So like when there's legislative change, such as changes potentially coming to inheritance tax, it's easier for us to spot all those instances of where that may appear so that once we understand what the changes are, we're able to actually roll that out.
So you have a record of what's out there, and are they all attached to, okay, this mentions the pension state limit, it mentions tax. So if those two
Yeah,
change, we can go and look at it.
yeah, and yeah, that's a hard process to keep a handle of because there are just so many things being added on a regular basis.
Yeah, of course. I mean, something on AdClear now is the ability to attach claims or numbers or figures. Obviously, when you upload to a promotion, so when you upload a FinProm, we'll basically automatically kind of take out the data points that might change, and we can define that before or sort of during working with AdClear. And what happens is every time you've noticed a change in legislation, or we have as well, we can quickly go and find those tags and know, we've got 30 campaigns out and they've been out since this long and we need to remove it. So we're seeing that across the industry too, that problem, and it's something we're trying to solve with automation and sensible workflows.
Yeah, no, definitely, because there are things that will always have to change, as I said, but then there are things that one thing I often think about is we use a lot of caveats around the age you can access your pension, which is 55, rising to 57 from 2028. And I look every year how we're nearing 2028, and I think that's going to be a potential headache when that time comes, that every pension brand is going to have to update pretty much everything with the new date and age.
Yeah, I think you'll be a
Busy
big
for a
marketer at that
while.
point. Yeah. And so moving on to working with third parties, we touched on influencers. It'd be interesting to know sort of the key audiences that you look after, and then how you sort of work with these third parties to sort of serve those audiences that you're looking at.
Yeah, so as a part of my role, I look after some of our key audiences. So they're consolidators, that's the broad stroke for anyone looking to combine all their pensions together. Then we look after women. So one of our aims is to have parity in our customer base. We're about 40+% now, but edging towards that 50 mark. Sustainable investors, the self-employed who are underserved in the industry because they don't benefit from auto enrollment, and at retirement customers. So suddenly as you're approaching retirement, your needs are very different and you're able to finally get your hands on the money that you've been investing into this time. So yeah, there are a lot of different audiences that we're looking after and we need to nurture. So some of the ways we do that are through different brand partnerships. So we look at different brands out there that align with our values who are speaking to those audiences and we work with them, whether that's to put on webinars, sponsor events, create blog content together that serves that audience, newsletters, social collaborations. There's so many different opportunities there. And it's important that in that process that, as I said before, with the influencers too,
Mm.
looking for those that align with our values, who have built up trust and reach with their own audiences and yeah, who are valued for the content and messaging they're putting out there.
Awesome, makes a lot of sense. I think something that's come quite clear to me through the last sort of 30 minutes we've been speaking is the breadth of and sort of pace at which you're working at sort of such a fintech like PensionBee, and how you have to serve these different audiences.
Yep.
And I think the customer care comes through a lot in your marketing. So is that some of the things that you really enjoy working at PensionBee for, or are there other things that makes it such a sort of good place to work?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of customer feedback, that comes into an we've got a live feed and it automatically comes in, and everyone that works here can see the good and the bad and the ugly that comes through. And I know Romy actually reads every single piece of feedback that comes in, which considering now we've got such a big invested customer base and so many employees and that same level of care where everyone that joins gets their own personal beekeeper in the UK is still there as we scale. And I think that's quite a unique proposition that, yeah, that customer care is put at the center of everything that we do. It shouldn't be the case. That should just be how every business operates. But yeah, you realize more and more how special that actually is. And then I think it's, as I said, it's the freedom within my role to help push forward different things that I care about. So closing the gender pension gap, I'm lucky that one of the groups that we serve is are women, and that is something that we need to raise awareness for. I can create partnerships around helping close that gap. So yeah, I think that's something else that makes it great to work here as well.
It's great to hear. Final question, I promise. If you could give a marketer in fintech three pieces of advice, what would they be?
Yes, so I think the first one is stay curious. Maybe this is controversial, but for me, I think if you want to be a good marketer, you have to live and breathe what you do and love advertising, whether that's looking at product features that are being released elsewhere by other brands, social content that does well, or TV advertising that you love and that resonates. I think you need to be looking at that and be curious about it in your own time. I don't think it necessarily means you've got to sit and look at every bank or anyone that's going out there. You can be FMCG, it could be retail, but just constantly learn and be curious about what makes good marketing and good advertising. And that I think that then helps you apply those learnings to your own work and improve what you're doing. I'd say be resilient as you alluded to earlier, it's a very, very fast-paced industry, and you need to be able to keep up with that. And I think it may not be for everyone as a result of that, but I think if it is for you, there's really great rewards because you're able to make impactful changes really quickly. But I think that's something I'd say be mindful of and try and work at if it's somewhere you want to work. And then I think it's about, as I said earlier, making sure that consumers understand how your product helps them and not just what it is. We get to work in democratizing finance and changing and simplifying things for the better. And so I think let's do things differently to how traditional financial services brands have, and actually talk about what the benefits for the customer are and not just the different features. But yeah, I think it's great that we're able to make those changes and drive innovation and simplicity. So yeah, I think those are the three.
Perfect. Well, we're coming to the end. Is there anything as a final piece you wanted to say or even ask?
Well, I think in terms of asking, what you were saying before about being able to add those tags is going to be a game changer for brands. It's those small incremental like as I was just saying, for me to consumers, it's understanding for marketeers. Those incremental changes are going to make such a big difference for their life. Have you got any other feature releases that you can talk about that may have that same impactful change for us?
Well, I think the sort of claims bank and being able to, like we discussed, retrospectively review promotions that are out for incorrect, out of date data, and to use that tagging for that search system and automation and notifications. That's a big piece of our roadmap. Something else is, on AdClear we have the interpretations of the rules, your interpretations, but often what we find is sometimes there's a bit of ambiguity or lack of clarity between the comms between compliance, marketing, legal, whoever's involved in the review process, even the agencies and influencers. So we want to present kind of the FCA's rule books, your own interpretations based on your live promotions, your live policies, and host that on AdClear. So you have that sort of self-hosted rule book, so that if something does get flagged, everyone is on the same page, literally on AdClear, because they can be directed to that page and see what the rule is, and if that needs to be changed for whatever reason, or marketing disagree with it and they'll be empowered to kind of disagree and make their own mind up. At least you've got the clear kind of, let's say, COBS rule, but also PensionBee rule, for example. Yeah, that's what we're really excited about, bringing clarity to what sometimes can be a bit of a sort of lacks transparency in the process.
Yeah, nice. No, I think what you guys are doing are great, and I can see how it will make marketers' lives a lot simpler.
That's what we're about.
Yeah, and then I think the final thing, I guess, one thing I was thinking about is adding personality and tone of voice to what can sometimes be deemed as a boring industry. I think that's one of the challenges, but we've seen lots of other great challenger banks do that well, and hopefully we're doing the same thing for
Yeah,
pensions.
absolutely. I mean, from our obviously we're deep in the market fintech industry, and we see a lot of content, as you can imagine, and definitely I think PensionBee stands out with being different and interesting, and that customer care, like I said, definitely comes through. I think on the benefit of something like AdClear as well is we being able to add brand guidelines and tone of voice and these sorts of things into the system means that you can have that consistent creative and
Definitely.
messaging throughout as well.
And remove that subjectivity, which I was saying is one of the greatest challenges of my role. One of the best things, but it's hard. So yeah, no, definitely. Well,
When
I
you
think
say
great.
subjectivity,
Just because some like the rules, they're open to, so like the financial promotion rules, tone of voice, there is a grey area where it's open to interpretation. Where is it on brand or is it not? And I think yeah, that ultimately comes down to individuals that live and breathe it every day and know it, but actually automating some of that. And as we grow and as people leave the business, that subjectivity is removed and it doesn't require people to have been here a really long time to know what is PensionBee or not.
yeah, definitely that educative piece, right? Like as you're joining, I think it's two things: the educative piece. So Brooke knows the tone of voice guidelines, but others don't. So where
Yeah.
can I go and see this? I can go and read the tone of voice document, but am I going to remember that? Am I going to do that?
Yeah. Do they want to see 100 pages versus real life examples where they can see it laid out?
Exactly. So you can get sort of educated through that, and then on an ongoing basis, if your tone of voice might change slightly, being able
Yeah.
to track that and see the versioning, the self-hosted kind of tone of voice guidelines on AdClear, for example, that's where we want to take it. So yeah, I'm glad that that solves potentially a pain point or a time-consuming element of your role.
Definitely.
Nice. Well, Brooke, I'm going to stop the recording there, but thank you very much for coming on.
That's okay. Thank you for having me.